Nick, you can kind of expand on this a little bit because you were chatting with the producer and the director about it. But I think this is kind of the first Final Fantasy in well over a decade that it kind of stepped out the door with a clear idea of what it was and managed to arrive where it was going in a timely fashion, and then not completely fall on its face when it got there. I mean, for instance, Final Fantasy XIII, with all due respect, we have some Final Fantasy XIII apologists here. That was like 3 separate games. Like that was practically a decade worth of games coming out that people had mixed reactions to.
I mean, I don't know if like it being a trilogy is something I would like fault it for, though. Like, yes, the story was kind of like elongated, I guess, but I don't know if I would fault it like 13's launch for that.
No. I mean, I'm like, I guess it's a tricky one because that was sort of an ambitious experiment.
But yes, it was definitely kind of the start to the change in Final Fantasy games was with 13. Some of the maps became a little bit more linear. Took a little bit longer to get going into like the open world focuses. It introduced the stagger meter because I don't believe it was in any of them prior to that. And so like it added a lot of new things to it. And that, for a lot of fans, that wasn't what they wanted. And you know what?
Yeah,
that's fine.
I mean, there's the common issue with games, which is just, it takes about 6 hours to get good. That one took like a game and a half to get. Like I remember talking to people about the
25 hours. 25-hour mark is when you get to Grand Pulse. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember people like really saying the third one was where it was kind of hitting its stride, but like you've got to get through 2 whole games there, and it's that part where you're like, is this a game? Is this game design or is this Stockholm syndrome? Like which is it? So
I think Final Fantasy 13 also has the difficult dilemma of giving you far too many proper nouns within the first 5 minutes of the game. Of the Grand Pulse, the L'Cie, the Fal'Cie is like what? Yeah. Like I am a Final Fantasy 13 defender, but even now I'm like, what is a L'Cie again? What is a Fal'Cie?
It is a little tough to keep it all straight. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah,
and I think that there is an inconsistency between each game as well. Like they're vastly different games from 13 to 13-2 and Lightning Returns. Plus, Final Fantasy 15 was originally versus 13,
right?
Until they eventually squashed that and just made it its own Final Fantasy.
So I was going to get to that in a second. In the middle there was of course Final Fantasy 14, which
came out its initial, and it was terrible. I played that initial version, and I am so glad they blew up that whole world and redid it for A Realm Reborn.
It's kind of impressive that they nuked it from orbit. They
literally did. And made it as part of the backstory for Realm Reborn,
which I adore. I think that's so cool. But
amazing.
So again,
so smart.
Yeah, and that one obviously like that found its footing, and it's if you find somebody who plays FF14, you found someone who loves it. I feel like there's not really like that is, and they've also they've had so many updates to it that
expansions.
It's how many Final Fantasy games would you even consider that at this point? Like it's
20.
Massive. 20, sure, why not? So yeah, that's obviously it's almost in its own category. But yeah, back to 15, it's bonkers that was revealed so far in advance as a 13 spinoff, and then it became it took forever. It became its own thing eventually. And it was also an anime, and it was also a movie, and it was also a instant soup commercial in the game.
Short stories online that you had, like it was a multimedia experience that you really had to do like a Nier style approach to actually being able to understand everything. And Nier, I mean like Nier Automata. Where you have to like scour forums looking for a short poem that was written by Luna Freya to Noctis the night before their wedding and whatnot. Stuff like that is like, there's so much content there. And I really, really like Final Fantasy 15, but it is so hard to deny that it feels like such an incomplete game. And in my interview with Yoshi P and Hiroshi Takai of Final Fantasy 16, I was surprised at how candid they were about Final Fantasy 15. They essentially said, hey, look, we heard your feedback about Final Fantasy 15, and a lot of people thought the ending was too abrupt. So our focus here was to try and make a game like Final Fantasy 16 that is complete from beginning to end. And they weren't kidding, because like the actual ending for Final Fantasy 15 was going to be DLC, and then it ended up getting canceled and turned into a book. So like it is like that moment is such a slice of the Final Fantasy 15 experience of the ending got canceled and now it's in a book.
I mean, I remember just the post launch updates that it got. Like I beat that not even like immediately when it came out. Like I was kind of slow on it, but then by the time I did, I remember I was just like, there was a sense of like buyer's remorse because they kept patching in stuff that made me want to go back. But I was like, was it chapter 12 or 13, the one that everyone hated, that they just completely, they just completely like fixed it. They like nerfed it or whatever. And then the thing that was my favorite is that you finish the game, you've got your flying Cadillac or whatever, and like it's theoretically an open world game, but if you land your car anywhere that's not the road, it explodes immediately.
Yeah.
And then I was like,
it is like horrific.
It's really, that was really, I feel like kind of missed the point of an open world game, but also extremely funny. And then it got funnier because they were like, yeah, it's got monster truck tires now. And I was like, I was already onto some other thing at that point. And I was kind of like, oh man, I wish I'd waited on this.
I have never fast traveled more in a Final Fantasy game than I have in Final Fantasy 15. Because I was like, I don't want to crash and blow up.
I think, like, people are saying, like, oh, I don't understand how Final Fantasy 16 is an actual evolution of the franchise. And honestly, I think everything we talk about from 13 to 16, like, we see it there. People were pissed at 13 for being too, quote unquote, linear. But the problem is Final Fantasy's always been linear. It just gives you the illusion of an open world because they're like, hey, you got to get from point A to point B. But what if that space between A and B was just semi-big, but you still have to get to point B? And that's what Final Fantasy 15 did, open world, quote unquote, but really the main quest is still A to B. And so I think what 16 does is it takes that linearity and it makes it a lot more cinematic. Same thing with 15. 15 was fantastic with its party relationships, and I think that's one of the strongest points of Final Fantasy 16 is the character to character interactions. There's actual nuance to the body language of our character models, which I think is kind of the first time I've ever noticed that in a video game. Like, performances are top tier in this, and I think it shows from beginning to end.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I'm so tired of like getting in these games and you're just talking to somebody else and they're just standing there just like, yes, how are you doing today? Yes. Oh my goodness, the sky is falling and blah, blah, blah. We should really do something. And then Final Fantasy 16 is like, they've got hand gestures and everything like that. They're moving around, like, and other games have done that to a degree, but I don't think it has. I think Final Fantasy 16 really marries that concept together and does such a great job of like putting the focus on it. There is a scene in a tavern that you go to, and I think the camera work is some of my favorite camera work I've seen in a video game. And it's excellent. I was like, I am so enthralled watching it. There's not a whole lot going on, but the camera is doing its job, and it's really just filming what you want to see. And it's great. They've done a really good job with 16.
No, I mean, bigger picture to sort of proverbially zoom out. I think like what's fascinating is that the timeline of 16, it was announced alongside the PS5, basically. It was part of one of those first showcases. And then, we got a pretty steady stream of updates without it feeling like it was kind of just being strung along. And then it came out in less than 3 years since it was revealed, and people like it. And that seems like so cool. Like, the other one we're not talking about is FF7 Remake, which I feel like is kind of waiting for Godot. Like, it's just, we're waiting on 2/3 of that game. Not counting this little weird interstitial side story guidance stuff that's happening in between. And, that's, the jury's out on how that's even going to be received whenever it eventually finally releases in its full form. And
it's going to be really good. It's going to be good.
It's going to be good.
It's going to be good.
It's going to be good.
It's going to be good.
It's going to be fantastic.
I mean, it has to be good.
It has to be.
If you're playing 3 whole games, it's got to be good.
It's got to be good.
Yeah, by the time you get there, it's going to be great.
If it's not good, then what's the point?
Yeah, if you play all those games, you're not really a Final fan. Why would you play it if you're not a fan? And if you're not a fan, why would you not like it?
Yeah, exactly. So it's going to be good.
Final Fantasy VII, it's got to be, of course, obviously.
I love Remake. I think Remake is, what Square Enix is doing right now with Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy 16 is really giving fans their cake and letting them eat it too. Like, it's really giving, so a lot of people, that have been, most of the complaints about 16 is like, oh, I want turn-based, so it doesn't feel like Final Fantasy. It's not Final Fantasy enough. And it's like, well, you've got 7 Remake that literally just dropped like a couple years ago, and we've got Rebirth dropping into this year, early next year, whatever that window is, winter 2023, whatever that means to Square Enix at this point. And that gives you your classic characters. It gives you your not turn-based combat anymore, but it gives you that kind of that feeling of going back to 7, which had turn-based combat, which you could still, like back in 7, you could still play with like the active mode where it time moved regardless of whether you put inputs in or not. And so like it's
the active time battle.
Yeah, it's always had an active time battle system, and so like 7 Remake and Rebirth are just kind of the like evolution of that.
Yeah, I mean the tricky thing there is how much of those they're obviously they're remakes, but there's also a little bit of rebirth. I think. What do you think the third one's gonna be called? It's gonna be Re something or R something.
It can't be Reunion because that's the name of the
movie, or not movie.
No,
but,
that's the name of Crisis Core Reunion.
Yes, Crisis Core Reunion. I think it's gonna be revisualization.
Revengeance.
Revengeance.
I think
yes.
I really hope they don't go with Revelations, but I feel like it could also be, and that it's the final.
Yeah, Revelations would fit.
I feel like a video game company should be fined for using that word in titles of games. But no, so to pull back, I think it's cool to see Final Fantasy kind of just complete the assignment on time.
I agree.
Got a pretty good grade at the end, and that's what
we're all in school for. We're all in school to get good grades.
That said, we've touched on this for a second ago, but one of the big sort of part of the mission statement I feel like with 16 was Square is trying to appeal to a new generation of fans. And we've seen some pretty major changes to what people think of as the conventional Final Fantasy experience, but in a lot of ways, 16 seems like it's kind of refining on some core ideas what the series has to it. But at the same time, it's got a 16 in the title, which seems like it's the kind of thing that could scare people off. So I'm curious, do you think this will appeal to a new generation of fans, Jada?
Yeah, I think it will. I think, if you look at I don't think they've released sales numbers or anything on it yet, but just score wise, it's in just kind of general consensus around social and stuff like that from people talking about it. A lot more people are getting into it. A lot of people are, it's their first Final Fantasy and they're really liking it. So hopefully that encourages them to go back and play some of the older ones in the catalog and then be ready for whatever 17 ends up being or looking like. And, I'm excited for that.
You think they're going to call it 17 or are they going to just throw a word in there instead?
Ooh, I think they're going to I hope they do 17 because I have a very fondness for the number 17. So
I feel like they really want to get all the way to 20 with the Roman numerals because that's a sick Roman numeral. You get 2 X's.
Yeah.
But after that point, it's like it starts, I mean, I feel like
I want to see a C in there. I want a 50.
Yeah,
get it. Is C a 100?
C is 100. C is 100. L is 50.
I want
Final Fantasy L.
We don't want to get to L.
I don't know.
You have to skip L.
No, I mean, I feel like even with software, like Photoshop hit a certain point, and they were like, "Yeah, we're not like." I think it was after 9 or something. They were like, "Yeah, it's we're changing to CS. It's going to be CS," and they're like, "Oh, let's just call it years. Let's just screw it. It's going to be Final Fantasy 2023, 2029, whatever."
I actually hope we don't ever get to a point where Final Fantasy is just throwing the year.
They will never do that. Maybe it'll be the year of the realm, and it'll be
that would make sense. Like, because I think a good chunk of this game takes in the year 878. So, but that'd be a weird number to put.
It's a good year.
It's a good year.
Nick, what about you? Do you think that 16 has enough to kind of pull in a new audience? And what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's already anecdotal, sure, but it feels like a lot more people are coming to Final Fantasy for the first time with the release of 16, and I think it also has a lot to do with the fact that there are a decent amount of PS5s out in the market with not a whole lot of first-party titles to play on them, or exclusive games to play on them, I should say. And I think that if you are a PS5 owner hungry for something new, this kind of checks all the boxes. So yeah, I think that people are going to be into Final Fantasy after this. I do worry a little bit that because of how approachable this game is, they're going to look back and be like, yeah, none of these games are particularly my jam. But I think that there is enough personality in Final Fantasy 16 and a lot of core Final Fantasy DNA to get them to go back and be like, you know what? Where did Moogle start to come in? Let's go see. Let's go see where Moogle started showing up. From? Yeah, and I think that there's enough there enough like tantalizing, fun markers of the Final Fantasy series that'll encourage people to go back, and then we will inevitably look at a subreddit or forum post of which Final Fantasy should I play next? 16 was my first one, and those are my favorite posts because it's just opening a world of fascinating possibilities.
Which should they play
to
next?
Newcomers.
For somebody who loves 16, where do they go from here?
Honestly, probably 7 Remake,
Yep.
because it takes that action strategy and kind of adds a more traditional Final Fantasy spin to it. And then from there, I think you go to like 12 or 10, and then
Never 12,
go
but 10.
backwards.
Yes, I agree.
I love 12.
What if you don't like, you want to keep your fantasy nice and medieval European?
Yes, okay. If you want to keep that,
Renaissance,
yes.
whatever. I mean, that's
Final Fantasy 4.
4, yeah.
just the last. You're gonna go all the way back there?
Gotta go all the way back.
If you want stories with like dragoons and stuff like that, and paladins and dark knights and stuff like that, that's 4.
Fair
It
enough.
shares a lot of DNA with 4. Like in the demo, we see there's a combat encounter with the dragoon who's like looking sick as hell, posted at the top of a castle, like on one leg, and that's just a straight up Kane's pose from Final Fantasy IV. When Kane is the dragoon of that game. So like there are such loving homages present in 16 that I think it'll get people to go back. Kind of like the phenomena of growing up of like, hey, I don't understand this reference this movie is making. Let me devour an internet archive or whatever in an attempt to figure out what this Simpsons reference is. And I think it is kind of akin to that, where you want to see where it all started. What are dragoons, and why does this guy look so cool and brooding?
I want
know.
the series aesthetic to go to do 6. Like I feel like 6 has such a specific look to it, which is like steampunk, but not annoyingly so.
It's like steampunk high fantasy without being annoying about it.
Yeah, I love steampunk, but I don't hate it.
It's got
exactly.
mechs,
which let me get some mechs in there. Anyway, viewers, listeners, let us know what you think. Curious to hear what everyone thinks, because obviously Final Fantasy isn't going anywhere. It's going to be interesting to see
be
sort of
here forever.
how it sustains itself.